Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and as you probably may have noticed, we are not doing any cooking at all today, and that is because for the last week I have been 6,000 miles away from home in Taipei, Taiwan. So I thought this might be a great time to kick off a brand new series that I've been hoping to start for a while now, dedicated to food travels and adventures of all kinds that have been inspirations to the recipes that we've been cooking on this channel for the last 4 years, because as you might have guessed, I did not invent fried rice or Mongolian beef. Taiwan in particular holds a special place in my heart, not only because it's where my own family heritage traces back to, but also because its night market and food stall culture is the inspiration for the Woo Can Cook fried rice pop-up, which many of you have found us here in Oakland for. For those not familiar, Taipei and its surrounding areas are world-renowned for its food stalls and night markets that serve up many of the iconic dishes that come from Taiwanese cuisine, all frequently unconventionally found on street corners, sidewalk stalls, and high-visibility open kitchen concepts that are not too dissimilar to what we do at Woo Can Cook. So, as you might imagine, one of my goals for this 8-day trip in Taipei was to explore every bit of food that I could possibly shove into my face. In addition to this though, I thought it also might be a fun side quest to bring along this mysterious photo of my grandpa that we found several decades ago, pictured here with absolutely no explanation standing next to the famous revolutionary military leader Chiang Kai-shek. On a pretty major long shot, I found a few archive agencies here in Taipei that may be able to shed some light on this photo, and more importantly, how it is that I came to be Taiwanese, because I've literally had this photo for my entire life and I have no idea where it comes from. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so first off, right off the bat, I'll mention right now that I did not realize that I would be vlogging this trip until about halfway through our first day, so you'll have to forgive me for these still photos and vertical videos here at first. But anyway, San Francisco to Taipei is known to be one of the longest flights in the world, clocking in at roughly 15 hours long, so on a whim we decided to upgrade our tickets to first class, which is the first time that I have ever done that, and it was pretty crazy, y'all. The most lavish thing that I've personally ever done with a plane ticket is pay an extra $20 for early check-in on a Southwest Airlines flight, so bottomless champagne with a 5-course meal and a sleeping pod with Eva Air was pretty different. And no, this video is not sponsored by Eva Air, but you know, if anyone from Eva is watching, hey, what's up? Either way, I've never actually eaten this much food on a flight before, so I actually got pretty sick from the flight, which is why I forgot to take any photos at all of our hotel room while it was still squeaky clean. We did get a pretty good deal on a 5-star hotel called the Grand Mayful here in Taipei, who again are also not a sponsor of this video, but hey, what's up? They had a bunch of cool amenities that I didn't really make use of, like a free spa and pool. I did end up using the gym with these weird looking weight sets on them, plus this shower that was the size of a small studio apartment was also pretty awesome too. Anyway, after a few hours I was pretty much fine, so we met up with my parents who both speak much better Mandarin than I do, so they brought us along for our first meal in Taipei at a spot called Lai Lai Doujiang, or Come Come, soy milk. As the name implies, Lai Lai specializes in the classic Chinese breakfast pairing of doujiang soy milk and youtiao, or Chinese savory donuts. We also grabbed a few other Taiwanese classic breakfast foods too though. This is a danbing egg pancake, some steamed turnip cakes here, xianbing stuffed pancakes, and a stuffed chive pancake called jiucai. My personal favorites from Lai Lai were these xianjing baos, which I've never actually seen before. These are basically xiaolongbao soup dumplings, but made with a yeasted dough, not unlike a baozi is made. The folks at Lai Lai do speak a limited amount of English, which is helpful, although their menu is exclusively written in Chinese though, so be prepared to mostly point at stuff if you don't speak very much Mandarin. After breakfast, we hopped on the Taiwan MRT Railway and checked out the Dihua district, which has a lot of shops and food stalls set up in old historical buildings. This is another area that we had heard a lot about on social media, much of which were largely a bust for pretty much anything that we found on Instagram, but I did actually think that Dihua was worth the trip though. There were some pretty cool shops and stalls worth checking out, like this guy slinging stinky chou tofu out of what is essentially a hot dog cart, or these ladies slinging hand-rolled mochi across the street from this other spot doing hand-rolled mochi but with a giant line. Dihua is also known for preserving a lot of old architecture too, so a lot of the alleyways and streets are pretty vibey, which I unintentionally said out loud when I was filming this, and then 3 other people started taking pictures of this same alley too. By our second day, I was still pretty jet-lagged, so I woke up at about 3 in the morning, which was awesome. One of my favorite things to do when this happens is to go for an early morning run, because I found that it's the best opportunity to check out an area from the perspective of a local. This is the Meitu River Park, which, according to a friend of mine, is where you'll find some of the best running trails in the area, because it's one of the only places in Taipei where you'll find uninterrupted stretches of running paths. Once everyone else woke up though, we hopped on the MRT again and checked out the Beitou district, which is known for its hot spring baths. When we got there though, the baths were actually pretty packed, so we ended up skipping the soak and just walked around the area instead, where there's lots of really cool and gorgeous hot springs flowing. As with pretty much everywhere else in Taiwan, there were folks on every single corner cooking something awesome, so I grabbed this bowl of braised pork belly lu rou fan for something like $2 in USD, which did not disappoint. And then I got one of these deep-fried green onion pancakes wrapped around a deep-fried egg on our way to the train station, which honestly might have been one of my favorite things that I ate for this entire week. This, by the way, I hope is the main lesson of this entire video. Don't be afraid to eat in unconventional places like this, because it's where you'll find most of the locals eating. So, train station green onion pancake? Yes, check. This was also the point where I realized that there are very few trash cans in basically all of Taipei, so I ended up actually carrying this trash around me for legit several more hours before I found an actual trash can, which brings me to my next travel tip in Taipei. Make sure to bring a backpack wherever you go, because you're gonna need it to carry your trash in it, because let me tell you, it was a real struggle to find a trash can out here. Despite all of this though, there's also somehow very little litter on the street too, which seemed pretty bizarre to me too. Anyway, after that we hopped on the MRT again to a fishing town called Tansui, which was sort of like a boardwalk town with really pretty sunsets and also really good popcorn chicken. There were a couple of folks here that were leveraging the freshness of the seafood too, where you could essentially pick out whatever had been caught that day and then they would cook it up for you literally next door where you bought the fish, which is pretty cool. We ended up grabbing dinner in this waterside Japanese restaurant though, where the clear upsell of the space was the view, because people started flooding in around sunset. Plus, look at this view. Once the sun went down, we also discovered that this bridge that we were standing next to also has a dancing light show, which was pretty cool. North of the boardwalk town is also a really popular night market. Unlike most other night markets here though, the Tansui market is not closed off to traffic, so fair warning, watch out for the moped traffic, because these guys have absolutely no intention of slowing down for you. I did end up getting some pretty decent boba out here though, plus one of these red bing hongdo bing cakes and some tamarind corn on the cob. By day 3, I was still feeling pretty jet-lagged and was up again at about 6 a.m. this time, so I went for a run back to Lai Lai for breakfast, because I basically haven't stopped thinking about their green onion pancakes for the last 3 days straight. They're just so flaky and fluffy. Once again, once everyone else was up, we hopped on the train again to check out an area called Da'an. There were definitely a few cool spots that were worth checking out here, but literally right across the street from the train station was this great kombucha spot called Cure 8, which was super refreshing because it was like 85 degrees out. The owner was actually one of the first people that we ran into that spoke solid English, and was also the first person to explain to me why every single thing that we bought out here came with one of these QR code receipts. Apparently, if you scan one of these things, it enters you into a lottery system where you can win cash rewards at the end of every month, sponsored by the government. Not very useful for tourists here for only 8 days, but you'll probably see a lot of locals scanning a digital version of these on their phones though. After that, we stopped for a second breakfast at another spot that's pretty popular on Instagram called Younghe. More Doujiang soy milk and Chinese youtiao donuts in true street stall fashion, served in a plastic bag on the sidewalk. I also thought that these fan tuan rice rolls were pretty good too, and then we got what I think were like several dozen xiaolongbao soup dumplings, which were also very tasty. Unlike Lai Lai, Younghe is a little bit more on the map social media wise, so the lines here were a little bit longer with more tourists at this spot too. Again though, not very much English spoken at this space either, so be prepared to point and nod if you don't have any Mandarin under your belt. Also in Da'an is a pretty interesting flower market that's hosted under the freeway overpass on weekends. If you're just visiting, you unfortunately can't take any of these plants home with you because of customs, which is a bummer. That said, I did end up stumbling on these folks slinging what I can only describe as popcorn waffle bites, I think. I'm not really sure, but whatever they were really good, and there were definitely folks slinging these all over Taipei too. Opposite the flower market though is another section dedicated to small wares and knickknacks too, which is fun. This lady insisted that I get a back massage from her using this butcher knife technique, which is floating around Instagram too. She seemed to have made metal instruments for this purpose specifically, but I've also seen a lot of people on Instagram doing this with literally 2 dull cleavers, which looks crazy and unnecessary. After that, we tracked down this bento box place that my mom had been looking for a while. She said that when she was a kid, these bento boxes were sold in the actual train station for riders to eat on their way to school, but she was never allowed to spend any money on them though, which sounds just like my childhood. In my opinion, it was a pretty standard bento box with what I would say is an above average piece of fried chicken, although I can also understand the nostalgia factor too. Before heading back to the hotel for the day, we stopped by the mall in Zhongshan, which later we found out is the largest ES Lite mall in Asia, which doesn't really mean anything if you don't know what ES Lite is, but basically it's a really busy mall that kind of reminded me of Times Square in New York, which was pretty overwhelming. Tucked behind the mall though is this series of alleyways, which is the home of some pretty cool thrift shops and record stores that I thought was a little bit more my speed. Lots of really cool vintage clothing and apparel, much of which was vintage American apparel, which is always interesting to check out in another country because it is essentially telling you what Taiwanese people think is American clothing, like this alternate universe Friends shirt or this Planet Hollywood Hong Kong jacket. The alleyways were a major vibe too, so there were a lot of folks taking Instagram pictures here, again, which, you know, we're making a YouTube video too, so I can't really judge about that. I did also find a pretty sweet jacket at this basement record store dedicated to Japanese art and vinyls, so if you're in the area, definitely hit up Par Store because this place was pretty cool. Day 4 we dedicated entirely to a day trip to Taroko Gorge, which is sort of like one of the biggest national parks in Taiwan. Lots of really cool hiking and caves, which definitely needed a full 14 hours to explore. We hired a private tour guide to drive us around for the day, which I think is the move because the drive is pretty windy and treacherous if you do it yourself, and alternatively, if you take one of the big tour bus tours, you're gonna get herded around like cattle, which is not fun. In any case, this is Danny. He's driven to Taroko Gorge over 200 times and showed us pretty much everything that we could possibly have wanted to see on this tour. We started off the day with a pit stop at this rest stop, which began my obsession with the insane foods that you can find at 7-Eleven and Family Mart. Like, look at this spread, y'all. I'd like to remind you that we are essentially at what is the equivalent of a truck stop rest area, and there's like fish cakes and tea eggs ready to eat here. I grabbed this steamed tasubao, which was pretty good, plus 2 of these onigiris for the road too. Also, I'm not sure why, but I spotted this guy smoking a cigarette with chopsticks, and it was definitely one of the funniest things I saw all day. Taroko is several hours outside of Taipei, so we ended up taking a couple of rest stop breaks. The next stop that we made was this pit stop in Nan'ao, which is a small town outside of Taroko where a lot of indigenous Taiwanese folks still live. Lots of interesting monuments here to the indigenous Taiwanese people, plus more food stalls and more 7-Eleven stops. I found some pretty good fried rice here, which was legit, but I was kind of disappointed when they cooked it in the back instead of using the burner out front. Womp. From there, Danny seemed to know all of the good spots that were worth stopping for, including a few places that I think even the big tour bus guides didn't know about. This is the beach in Taroko, which had been closed off to pedestrians for some time now, but Danny somehow knew a back way in through this fish market where he had convinced the fishmongers to let us hold this crazy tuna, which was definitely a highlight. He also showed us this cool Cliffside mountain tunnel, which later I found out has a sign that specifically says not to walk to the tunnel because there's no shoulder and there's oncoming traffic coming. Whoops. After that, he brought us to this cool cliffside where you can see the trains passing through the mountaintops, which I miraculously somehow managed to capture on camera. On top of all this, Danny also seemed to know which spots were not worth stopping for too, like this tunnel that a lot of the tour buses had stopped for, but we passed on it because later on down the road was this much cooler tunnel with, of course, a rest stop with even more food and mango juice that this lady upsold me super hard on. We also hiked this massive trail to get to the next temple, which was pretty cool. The tour buses were starting to catch up with us at this point though, so Danny told us to make it quick and we could check out this second, even higher bell tower temple, which included me confronting my extreme fear of heights when we crossed this very sketchy looking suspension bridge. Which, you know, always inspires confidence when you notice a broken plank at the beginning of it. That's great. In any case, at this point we had been hiking for about 7 or 8 hours, so we were pretty tired by this time. But then Danny said that the best trail is the very last one, which is the Baiyang trail, which had only very recently reopened a few weeks ago. So Danny straight up just dropped us off at the end of a 7 or 8 hour hiking day and handed us some flashlights and ponchos on a 75-degree and sunny day and said it's a 2-hour hike, watch out for the bats. Always a good sign, I guess. Turns out that the ponchos were for the waterfalls at the end of the trail, which, travel tip number 3, I definitely did wish that I had brought some water shoes for, cause my feet got pretty soaked at the halfway point of a 2-hour hike, which is never a good thing. I did see a frog and also I walked through a waterfall, which was pretty cool. Also, I mean, look at all this nature, y'all. Pretty crazy. Anyway, the point is, if you're considering making a trip to Taroko, hit Danny up because he knows all of the best spots. After all of this, we finally went home and we were way too tired to go out and find food, so we ordered some Pizza Hut to our 5-star hotel, which was pretty awesome. Shout out to Pizza Hut for this spicy pork bulgogi pizza, which was pretty awesome, although they literally don't make just like a normal pizza. It's pretty bizarre.